Ready for your weekly tech fix? Want to know how technology sets us free? Well, get ready because here it comes. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, entrepreneur and technophile Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now, here's Brian.
And the golden stallion of the tech world, ready for another great episode of Sovryn Tech. It's always a great episode of Sovryn Tech. Well, maybe not always, but I like to think that each episode goes off rather well and is very unique in its own right. And, but I'll admit, there's times where I'm kind of off my game. But anyway, today, not off my game, but on location. No need to say where. But also next week, you will be getting an early release of next week's episode because I do believe I will be away at a nice little Liberty event. So we got a lot of on-location work. But I guarantee when I go away, I usually, and my listeners know this, I usually give you a double load of Sovryn Tech, and next week will be no different. You will get a double load. So here we go. Let's get right into it. An opening thing, one of the big questions I got this week from a lot of listeners was, hey, Golden Stallion of the tech world, what do you think about the Moto X? Of course, the Moto X is the motor. Recently, in the past couple of years, Google, they had bought Motorola, the, very famous mobile company. They do all kinds of things, not just smartphones, but they had, a pretty high-end smartphone line, like the Droid series for Verizon, etc. And they finally came out with since Google bought them, they just kind of been doing business as usual. They've been developing, the usual phones that they've been developing, nothing Google specific. But now, finally, they have released a phone with the input of Google and of Google's design. And the Moto X, well, just real quick, the three big things about it, I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about the Moto X because there's not a whole lot to say. The three big things kind of going for it are, one is that it heavily runs off of voice commands. I hate that. I don't, this is one of the reasons I don't like Google Glass, is I don't like the idea of having to talk to something for it to work. I get the idea of, the Star Trek computer, and Google's trying to become that, and you want to be able to naturally interact with the computer, and you want the computer to recognize you and talk to it. But I find that patently annoying. I'm a big believer in the idea, this used to be for the Linux distribution called Backtrack. This kind of used to be the tagline for it, which was, the quieter you are, the more you are able to hear. And I love that because it falls under, kind of one of my personal rules of life, but it falls under, one of the things I consider a good idea for a person to do in life, and that's to pay attention. Okay, just pay attention to everything. And, so I really don't like the idea of voice commands, of voice controls, not interested in that at all. And recently I've seen people with video of using the Moto X, and it doesn't do a good job of the voice voice recognition and voice commands. Quite frankly, it's a clusterfuck. So I find that annoying. The other big point about the Moto X, or another big point about the Moto X, is that it's customizable. But unfortunately, it's not customizable in the way that a lot of tech journalists were hoping, and a lot of tech fans, I guess you could say. They were wanting it to have like customizable hardware. Now, there's some degree, you have some options of choice with the RAM, I guess, but really the only options you get are how it looks. Like you can get a nice wood grain cut for the case of it, or you can get some hot pink, which hot pink's nice. But the bottom line is everything I own is black. I'm Brian Sovryn. I'm the man in triple black. It doesn't just affect my clothes. I generally, everything I own, I usually try and buy it black. Okay, so that means nothing to me for it to have all this stylish design. Everybody complains about, Android phones being these black slates. Good, I'm glad. That makes my buying options a lot easier. And the third big thing, and this, if you go to the Motorola website and you read about the Moto X, you look at the info graphic that they have. One of the big things they tout is that it's made in the USA. Yeah, USA, America, woo! I couldn't give a fuck. I don't care where it's made. In fact, if that makes it cost more, what a waste. To just have it made in America. That is, I'm in awe. I'm wondering, where exactly is that a big deal? Like, especially with Android fans, because the number one selling phone, more so, or the number one company that sells phones more so than even Apple, is Samsung. Samsung's not an American company. They're from Korea. So who cares? People buy from the number one selling phones are from a company in Korea. So, is this about jobs? Making jobs in this country? Well, come on. Stop that. So anyway, all the major highlights of this phone mean absolutely nothing to me, and I think they're bad ideas. It's not. I mean, maybe people think the whole voice thing is cool, but I've talked about it on this show before. Like I said, with Google Glass, just picture this: Moto X, show me Gianna Michaels gangbanged, interracial or something. You know what I mean? I mean, who's going to do that? And I think one of the things that people find very attractive about phones is the very private nature of them. That you can, look at it at your leisure, at your comfort, even on a bus. And most people, unless they're like openly looking over your shoulder, don't have to see what you're doing. You can be private about it. And so the whole idea of voice commands just gets rid of that. And I think whether people realize it or not, when they start using this voice command stuff, they're going to find out, I don't really like this. I mean, it's like texting. Texting has become a big deal again. Texting technically is 150, 200-year-old technology. It's telemetry. It's old-fashioned, with it's not Morse code, but it may as well be. This is what Western Union was doing, in the early, late 19th century, is texting. And then they said, well, everybody got a case of the talkies when the telephone came out. But then, now what's the big deal? It's texting. And good, texting's great because you get to do things at your time. It's private, it's quiet, it can be done in school. And that, that's the other thing too, is like, I mean, how many kids in school and teenagers are a huge buying demographic, okay? Because if the teenagers aren't making the money, their parents are, and their parents are buying for them, or their aunts or uncles or whatever. So that's a key demographic for any kind of device going to market. And now these teenagers can't hide anything because they have to talk to the phone. They have to say exactly what they're doing. It's not going to take off. I think it's a bad idea. And again, I could care less what color it comes in. But that part's just me. Anyway, let's get into this week's. That's not the main story of the week. We'll get into this week's story. And this has to do, it's something that we talked about briefly on Free Talk Live last week. For those that don't know, I am a co-host on Sunday nights on Free Talk Live. And this has to do with Tor, the onion router. And what the onion router is, if you don't know, it's kind of an internet above the internet. It's kind of like a remora attached to the internet's shark. And it is a totally symbiotic relationship. One does not exist without the other, Tor doesn't exist without the internet. But it really is its own thing, and it is its own world. If you don't know about Tor, pay attention. Again, pay attention to to the story I'm going to talk about, but look into Tor if you have not already. You're going to be scared after hearing some of what we're talking about, but that doesn't mean that this still isn't an incredible revolution in technology. And we've talked about Tor on this show before. I imagine my listeners are very much aware. But anyway, this story comes from IT World, and it's the Tor project. Now, this is the people who actually are, making Tor, who develop Tor and keep the code going. Tor project. Stop using Windows and disable JavaScript. I could agree with both, but we'll go, later on I'll talk a little bit more just how difficult both of those might be. The anonymizing network gives some advice following a startling Firefox zero-day vulnerability. The Tor project is advising, and this is from August 5th, the Tor project is advising that people stop using Windows after the discovery of a startling vulnerability in Firefox that undermined the main advantages of the privacy-centered network. The zero-day vulnerability allowed as yet unknown interlopers to use a malicious piece of JavaScript to collect crucial identifying information on computers visiting some websites using the Onion router network, that being Tor. Now, if you don't know what a zero-day, you probably hear this a lot, maybe in the news. Maybe you don't hear it a lot in the news, because I don't imagine there's a whole lot of people at CNN that even knows what that means. But zero-day just means that it's a bug or a vulnerability that people didn't know was there when the software was developed. So, like Firefox, it's up to version 23. When Firefox 23 came out, it had a bug. Nobody knew about it, but somebody found a way to exploit that bug, and so that's why it's called zero-day, because it just, it wasn't like this is the first day of it existing. It wasn't known to exist, and so that's where zero-day comes from. Anyway, really, switching away from Windows is probably a good security move for many reasons, according to a security advisory posted Monday by the Tor project. The Tor project's reasoning comes from the characteristics of the malicious JavaScript that exploited the zero-day vulnerability. The script was written to target Windows computers running Firefox 17 ESR, Extended Support Release, a version of the browser customized to view websites using Tor. People using Linux and OS X were not affected, but that doesn't mean they couldn't be targeted in the future. This wasn't the first Firefox vulnerability, nor will it be the last, the Tor project warned. The JavaScript was likely planted on certain websites that the attacker wanted to see who came to visit. The script collected the hostname and MAC address of a person's computer and sent it to a remote computer, the exact kind of data that Tor users hope to avoid revealing while surfing the internet. This exploit doesn't look like general-purpose malware. It looks targeted specifically to unmask the Tor browser bundle users without actually installing any backdoors on their host, said Vlad Treskovich, a security researcher who analyzed the code in an email. He published an analysis on his website, and of course you can go to the show notes at sovryntech.com or soundcloud.com/sovryntech, and there's links in this story to more about this. The Tor project also advised users to turn off JavaScript by clicking the blue S by the green onion within the Tor browser. Disabling JavaScript will reduce your vulnerability to other attacks like this one, but disabling JavaScript will make some websites not work like you expect, Tor wrote. A future version of Tor Browser Bundle will have an easier interface for letting you configure your JavaScript settings. The vulnerability was patched by Mozilla in later versions of Firefox, but some people may still be using the older versions of the Tor Browser Bundle. The bundle's browser, based on Firefox, is especially configured to visit Tor sites which have URLs that look like, and it's like the string. It's not www, it's a string of characters. Requests to websites on Tor take a circuitous route through a network of servers around the world designed to obscure a computer's IP address and other networking information that makes it easier to link a computer to a user. Several Tor browser bundle versions were fixed over a 4-day period starting June 26, 2013. Although the browser bundle will automatically check for a new version, it is possible that some users didn't upgrade, which could have put them at risk. It's reasonable to conclude that the attacker now has a list of vulnerable Tor users who visited those hidden services, the Tor project wrote. Although unconfirmed, security experts have theorized the malware may have been used by law enforcement to collect information on people who browse certain Tor websites supported by a company called Freedom Hosting. The hosting company is believed to be connected to a 28-year-old man, Eric Owen Marks. He is being held by Irish authorities pending an extradition request from the U.S. on charges of distributing and promoting child pornography, according to the Irish publication The Independent. In response to a query about the case, the FBI said Monday that someone had been arrested as part of an investigation, but did not identify the person. Now, there is a whole lot going on there. As far as Freedom Hosting, that last bit, Freedom Hosting is a web server host, a web, an IP host, and they are the largest. Freedom Hosting is the largest hosting service for Tor. So that's a big deal. And supposedly, now this article is saying it's theoretical, but I guess there's a little more evidence now to say that it's not theoretical, it's true. The FBI is actually the one that set up the 0-day, or that made use of the 0-day vulnerability. The FBI wants to know what's going on in Tor. Why would they want to know what's going on in Tor? Because, yes, things that are considered illegal by the governments of the world do get bought and sold on Tor. It's true. And you can go to websites like the Hidden Wiki on Tor, and you'll get a full listing of all the services provided. And pretty much anything you can contemplate on Earth is provided. Now, child pornography. What about that? They're saying, oh, this guy, was pushing child pornography. That does exist on Tor. It is true. In fact, actually, the very famous hacker group Anonymous has made it a kind of a running campaign on Tor to not take down Tor. They love Tor, but they want to take down the child pornography sites that are on Tor. So the hackers are, by and large, the majority of the hacker universe, hacker society, is very much against child pornography, despite what a lot of news organizations like The Independent in Ireland would want you to know. They want you to believe that, they're hackers because they're pedophiles, which just is patently false. So what's the deal with Tor? Is it still safe to use? As long as you update clearly, yes. Why are they saying stop using Windows? Well, this is like a really old fact, and that is Windows was never designed with security in mind. It wasn't. That wasn't part of the program. But what was, designed with security in mind was Unix systems. Okay, and Unix is a very, very old operating system, and it is the basis in a lot of ways. It's the base, or Linux. That's why it's called Linux, because it's kind of based off of Unix. And then OS X, the X in OS X, it means 10 because after OS 9 they came out with OS X, which would make it the 10th OS. But it's also a reference to the fact that it has within its shell, it has Unix. It is a Unix-based operating system. So OS X and Linux were designed with security in mind. Okay, with the idea that the system, the operating system, we've got to protect the kernel of the operating system, which is the most important part. And so that's there. So why are they saying stop using Windows? Not to say necessarily that Windows, that people that use Windows believe in insecure computing or something, but just the simple fact that the operating system wasn't designed for security in the first place. It was designed for mass adoption, and of course, as many people know, Windows wasn't even, it was a copy of what Apple was developing at the time. So the whole purpose of Windows was to just get out there and get out there first. DOS was not, which was the basis of Windows for a very, very long time. And despite what Microsoft may say, I think it's still the basis. DOS is, that wasn't designed for security at all either. And that was the backbone of Windows, for eons. So again, why are they saying do that? Because it's not secure. It's not secure at its heart. It's not secure by design. So that's why they're saying get away from that. Now, can you get away from Windows if you want to play video games? No. Otherwise, yeah, I think you can get away from Windows. I think that's pretty well. I mean, if you want to do like if you're a creative person, like you do video and you do photo editing, and all that stuff, I'd recommend using a Mac anyway. I wouldn't recommend using Windows for that. At least then you have like a really secure operating system. Now, what are they talking about with JavaScript? Can you go without JavaScript? No, and this is something. Like when you turn JavaScript off, I've had people, say to me, well, I just leave JavaScript off. And I'm like, well, do you go to Amazon? Because Amazon doesn't work without JavaScript. So, I mean, I guess if you don't want to go shopping on Amazon, and yeah, you can say you're going to use your phone. Okay, fine. But we're talking about in general on a computer, the average person. Yeah, you turn off JavaScript, and man, for a lot of the web, it's over. What a lot of web browsers do, and in fact, the newest version of Firefox finally does this. Internet Explorer and Chrome have been doing it forever. They do kind of a hybrid where JavaScript is like on and off at certain points. So you get what I'm saying. It knows what certain web addresses are, and so with those, it will make sure JavaScript is on, like Amazon, so that it works normally. But then at the same time, when you're just going around, regular websites, it will turn off JavaScript on its own. Firefox does that normally. Now, Tor does not always run off of, the latest version of Firefox, because there's a new version of Firefox coming out almost every month, or at least it seems that way. They'll use what they call the extended release, or the long-term support, kind of similar to Ubuntu's numbering strategy, where every couple versions they'll come out with one that they'll support for like the next 8 years, or 4 to 8 years, but they'll keep coming out with new versions of it that won't have that long of a support. Firefox does the same thing, and Tor smartly uses the older version. Now, is this a knock on Firefox? No. Is this a knock on open source software? Not at all. In fact, the very fact, you can say, well, because it's open source, that's why they were able to find the vulnerability. Well, at the same time, because it's open source is part of the reason that they were able to fix it so quickly. And also that now that they're aware of it and it's open source, these kind of things can be worked out long before. As to where you take more closed source companies with their software, like Apple or Microsoft, and they won't even tell you about the bugs. You won't even know. They'll just have it in there, like Prism. How do you know? How do you know, what Prism can do inside of Windows? You have no idea, because you can't look at all the code, or hackers can't look at all the code. Not to say you have to. I don't have all day to look at the code either. So, Tor is still viable. It's still, just make sure you go and update it. This is by no means the end of Tor, but it is something to consider. I think it's important that this story kind of comes out, because it gets people into the mindset, hey, if you want privacy, you got to think about just the very nature of security in the software you're using. And using Windows, not secure. I mean, that's just the bottom line. But if you want to play video games, I understand. I have Windows working on a machine too. I'll be back with more.
Once upon a time, long before the dawn of digital technology and social media, analog dinosaurs roamed the earth. Free thinkers relied on underground newspapers to spread their radical ideas. If you thought that underground newspapers were extinct, pick up a copy of Obsolete magazine from Obsolete Press. Each issue of this old-school newsprint tabloid is packed with original DIY articles, counterculture essays, science fiction stories, and artwork by a list of international contributors who are dedicated to smashing the status quo. Obsolete magazine is available from obsolete-press.com, and Obsolete Press offers special discounts to readers who use Bitcoin. Until August 11th, Obsolete Press is running a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign. If you like what you read and want to pledge, look for the link at obsolete-press.com. Social media is great, but Obsolete offers a reading experience unlike anything on the web. The underground newspaper is alive and well. Read Obsolete and get your hands dirty. Tech Roulette. Want to play?
It's time for Tech Roulette, where I cover stories that get sent to me via Twitter or email or on sovryntech.com. All those are great ways to get in touch with me. Email is still sovryntech@hush.ai. We will be rolling out the new email soon. But, I'll leave sovryntech@hush.ai because it's free, because Hushmail offers such a great service. That'll be running for a while. So if you hear this episode, months in the future, you can still email sovryntech@hush.ai. And again, you can also go to sovryntech.com. There's ways to anonymously, send me a message or send a story, whatever. And also, of course, on Twitter, you can do that as well. Anyway, this is kind of interesting. We're getting a little sciencey here. So this is the show about science, technology, and how it sets you free. And this is definitely, this is some deep thinking into what's going on in the world of science and really the world of technology, because this is from the Huffington Post, and it's a blog, it's from one of their blogs that they host on the Huffington Post, and it's from Seth Shostak, and why bother searching for ET, meaning extraterrestrials? So why are we bothering searching for aliens with things like SETI? We'll get right into the post here. It's a disturbing question, and one that I seem to get more frequently than before. Why are you looking for evidence of extraterrestrials? What's the point? Well, I have always thought that the motivation for looking for ET was both self-evident and patently worthy. It's possible that I'm a victim of my own job description. Others don't inevitably agree. Some will opine that there are better ways to spend the money. With all the problems we're facing here on Earth, climate change, environmental degradation, war, poverty, and more, why are we wasting funds looking for space aliens? That's the same argument that's often lobbed at NASA space programs and at basic research in general. The thrust is that if your work isn't obviously helping to better my lot, or maybe the lot of a lot of others, then you're just friction in the system. My knee-jerk rejoinder to this all-too-easy humanism is to note that the amount of money involved is tiny. The total funding of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, in the U.S. is 0.0003% of the tax money spent on health and human services. And it's not even tax money. The SETI Institute's hunt for signals is funded by donations. But while pointing out the realities of funding is certainly legitimate, I've recently promised myself to avoid doing so. It gives up too easily and sounds like a confession. Yes, you're right, it's a waste, but a very small waste. Well, it's not a waste. The hunt for other sentience in the cosmos is done for reasons that could be extremely important and that, in any case, gratify the finest aspects of our spirit. Consider the practical consequences of discovering company among the stars. These benefits are, admittedly, uncertain and hard to predict. They depend on whether we could ever decode signals from intelligence that is not only many light years distant, but enormously ahead of us in technical ability. We're not going to hear from beings that are at our level. They won't have the equipment necessary to transmit a signal that today's SETI experiments could pick up. So if a radio disturbance from ET someday floods our antennas, you can be sure that whatever's behind the microphone would judge our own knowledge of science to be merely quaint. Consequently, if we can make heads and tails of their signal, we could become privy to knowledge that would otherwise remain unknown until developed by our descendants centuries or more in the future. While this manna from the skies could be profoundly disruptive, you can't argue that ignorance is blissfully preferable. Or it's not. But what if, as is thoroughly possible, we're unable to understand ET's broadcast? What if we just know they're there? In the months following a detection, intense study of the signal source would garner a handful of astronomical facts: the distance to the senders, a few planetary parameters such as the length of day and the likely mean temperature, and possibly some information about the atmosphere, all of which would be interesting and even mildly informative. Did ET evolve on a world somewhat like our own? But it would leave us guessing about the inhabitants based on the habitat, and the meaning of the message might eternally elude us. However, even without that prize, the contest is more than worthwhile. Exploration is an oft-lauded human activity, and one that resonates in the same way that music and good stories do. It's hardwired into our species and into many others, no doubt because it has survival value. Exploration occasionally rewards those who accept its risks, usually with new resources. There's little need to expound on the romantic lure of exploration, for few would dispute it, but there is a special appeal in a search for otherworld intelligence. We have deep fascination for this because, after all, Darwinian mechanisms ensure that all life has a paramount interest in its own species. For us, other thinking beings are subconsciously regarded as potential equals and interest us as competitors or mates. Of course, real aliens would be neither, but their sentience makes them compelling in a way that extraterrestrial bacteria are not. Well, that's kind of a shame that they couldn't be our mates, but anyway. Our curiosity is broader than merely the innate interest in cosmic doppelgangers, however. We want to know if intelligent life is some sort of wildly improbable accident. Are we the only members of the galaxy that can actually understand what a galaxy is? Could Homo sapiens really be the pinnacle of creation, the cleverest critters in the cosmos? If we learn the answer is no, that would affect our philosophies forever. In the past, I was seldom asked why we hunt for extraterrestrial company, only how. Perhaps the realities of today's world have narrowed our vision to the near to hand. SETI is too speculative, and sure, concern for the immediate and the demonstrably practical is helpful in the short term. But if we only look nearby, we can't see where we're going. Frank Borman remarked that exploration is really the essence of the human spirit. Borman's an astronaut, so he was tipping his hat to his own career. And so am I when I say that SETI is done out of curiosity and is both tremendously exciting and undoubtedly worthwhile. It might alter the trajectory of our civilization, but more than that, a search for others feeds the best in our nature. All that's pretty trite and nice, and I appreciate the listener submitting that. I do have... I agree that exploration is kind of maybe an innate thing that we have, whether a lot of people realize it or not. I mean, they may not be going on epic sea voyages as we did a couple hundred years ago or more. But I think people are genuinely always exploring their own natures or the natures of others, or just like exploring the social strata. So yeah, I do think that to some degree exploring is kind of a part of all of us. And with that in mind, does that make us all that we're a bunch of Magellans, that we all want to search for extraterrestrial life? No. It doesn't mean that. Is SETI worthwhile? Is looking for extraterrestrial life worthwhile? For first thing off, I'll say that if we are to find anytime soon, it would probably be on Europa, which is a moon in the solar system. Europa has, not theoretically, but Europa, is an ice moon, and it has water potentially, and water is, to so many the corners, or is considered, and rightfully so, the cornerstone of life. And so there's a chance that life could be found there. Of course, Arthur C. Clarke dallianced with the idea in his tremendous book 2061. Which was like a second sequel to 2001, and actually my favorite in the 4-book series. And that the idea has been thought of, that Europa is where we would actually find life. Do I think that we're going to find life elsewhere, or transmissions from life elsewhere? No. No, I don't, unless it's life that's just so old, like it'd be an alien species that had just been around for so long. And why do I say that? And these are things that I've briefly touched on before, but I don't believe that. And I know there's been people who talk about warping space, or there's guys who've done the math on how moving faster than light is possible. I am of the absolute opinion, and what I consider fact, that moving faster than light just isn't possible. You can't, human, or should I say, life can't do that. Could we do something like Star Trek, where they have subspace signals? They're signals that can actually that can move really, really fast because they're actually like kind of in another dimension. Maybe, but SETI's not going to find that, because that would be in another dimension. So you can't, you can't detect what's not even within like the very realm of of radiation that you're looking for. So do I think SETI's worthwhile? I guess it's a nice thought. There was a time in my life where SETI really excited me. I'm glad it's not, government funded. I'm glad that it's all done by donation. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of have to agree with, I guess, what we'll call the skeptics, where people are like, look, we've got war and poverty. What are we doing spending money on this stuff? Yeah, I kind of agree. And what's the immediate answer to that by most people? Well, the immediate answer is that, and actually Ronald Reagan even said this in the 80s as president. He's like, wow, if we just found, an alien species, imagine how quickly all our differences would go away. And I think there's a lot of people in SETI, and Seth Shostak might say the same thing, where, yeah, if we found other life on another planet, like other intelligent life in particular, and that's the point. They're looking for ETs, not just regular life. Regular life, I think, may have actually, we might have found some of that on some space debris, essentially, or, on comets that have crashed in like Antarctica. I think we may find, your regular everyday, bacteria, or maybe even some kind of fish, perhaps, on Europa. I'm open to that. But as far as extraterrestrial life, no, not happening. But anyway, the point they would make, so they're looking for extraterrestrial life, and the point that they'll make is that all of our differences will go away, and religion will go away. Not that I'd mind that. Believe me, I'd love it if aliens showing up would get rid of religion, then please, aliens, land now. I don't wait, just land. But my response to that is that if the only reason that we grow up as a species is because we find another species, we're pathetic. And actually, that's all the more reason for an advanced civilization, for advanced ETs to not land here. It's like, look, they haven't grown up yet. They're still killing each other en masse. And they think it's right. And they think it's okay. It's not even like, yeah, we were forced to do it. No, they think, yeah, that's all right. These people that are across this pond, across this little ocean, which it's not even a pond when you look at interstellar scales, because this person lives on the other side of a pond, that they're less human and you can kill them. Holy shit. You know what? If I was an alien and I looked down at 90% of humanity, I'd have everything on stealth mode to make sure I wouldn't go anywhere near this planet. In fact, when I was a Christian, interestingly enough, that was something I was taught, was that, aliens wouldn't come here, like that UFOs were demonic, because aliens wouldn't come here because they'd look at sin and they'd go, what the hell is that? This is terrible. Sin is such an atrocious thing. But anyway, that's kind of off topic. So anyway, so the idea that, yeah, if we just find other life, that's going to tell us so much about who we are and all that, that is not necessary at all. The search for extraterrestrial life can be fun, no doubt about that. I'm not against it per se, and if that's where you want to put your money, then please, voluntary interaction, put your money there. But do I think it's worthwhile? In the grand scheme of things? No, not at all. In fact, it might even be worth less. I don't see the point. Now, granted, I'm also a person, some people call me kind of a downer when it comes to exploring space, or when it, comes to all that, which, it's funny because I love science fiction. In fact, I was at one point literally the king of the nerds. Believe me, I'm all about, alien, all this alien stuff, other world stuff. But, people think I'm kind of a downer because I don't agree with the idea that there are millions of planets, perhaps just in our galaxy, that there are millions of planets that support life and that there's life on. I don't agree with that at all. I think there's a handful. Now I don't know if I agree. Now in Judaism, this is interesting. In Judaism, actually, there is an answer as to how many planets in the universe have life. And I think it's like 180,000. Or maybe it's 18,000. But I know it's a number like that. And, you know, I'm not saying that because I was raised Jewish or because I'm ethnically Jewish. But, yeah, I'd believe that number. You know, but I don't believe millions. Not a chance. I mean, when you take into consideration the idea of the Goldilocks zone and just what it really takes, you know, for there to be life on a planet, I mean, that just makes the odds ridiculous. You know, I mean, you know, you're going to win the lottery before that. You know what I mean? Before you find a planet that matches up with that stuff. And yeah, you always get these news stories from Live Science and Space.com that say, "Oh, we found an Earth-like planet. We found one that's in the Goldilocks zone." Well, that's nice. You achieved maybe 20 out of the 50,000 requirements for life, Earth-like life to exist. You know, intelligent life to exist. But, you know, that's it. You only achieve 20 out of 50,000. So now I'm not being a downer. Like I said, it can be fun. But the question is it worthwhile? No, I don't think it's worthwhile. Do I think money could be spent better elsewhere? Absolutely. Are war and poverty a couple of those things that money should be spent on to end? Yes. Yes. And again, if you want to give me the argument that, but if we find life, all this will stop, that's ridiculous. That says such terrible things about being human. That we can only, you know, that we're just constantly comparing ourselves instead of intrinsically looking at ourselves to see who and what we are. We always have to be doing things by comparison. We always have to be keeping up with the Joneses. Very sad. So anyway, so to some degree, I do agree with the article, with the blog, but in other cases, is it all worthwhile? No, I'd shut down SETI tomorrow if it was my dime. Anyway, this is Brian Sovryn. You're listening to Sovryn Tech. I'll be back with more.
Wow! It's a website of the week.
It's time for website of the week, and this is where I cover, you know, a website that I find interesting or that, you know, has good material. Sometimes it's a blog. Sometimes it's a website that gives you great information on how maybe to get more privacy in your life. Sometimes it's a terrible website. In this case, it's none of those, but this is a great website all the same. And the website is Abandonia. I hope I'm saying that right. Abandonia, as in abandonia.com. Abandonia.com. And Abandonia, what it is, it's a website that offers and covers and talks about abandonware. Now, what is abandonware? Abandonware with computers is software that is essentially fallen out of copyright. You know, no one's holding the copyrights on it or whatever. So it's, you know, it's free to mess with, it's free to download, it's just out there, you know, and no one's doing anything with it. And this is very popular with games, okay? Because a lot of the games like from the 90s, and we're talking absolute classic games that have a lot of really modern elements to them. Because, you know, it's important to note that, yes, there was a large, and we've talked about it with like people that play Doom, you know, or whichever, you know, there's an element of, you know, there was plenty of people that were playing PC games, but by and large, the world was still playing console video games in the 90s. And so there's a lot of great games that came out that most people have never even heard of. Like here's a great game that you can actually get on Abandonia.com. It's called Strife. And it's a first-person shooter, but it's actually sandbox. And it's from like 1995, 96, something like that. I mean, it's an ancient game. It's like if you played any of the Day X games, it's definitely the prototype for any Day X game. And I mean, just incredible. And you can download it. You can run it in DOSBox, or you could whatever you want to do. I mean, there's other ways to get Strife too. If you're really, really interested, because I mentioned Strife, if you're really, really interested in getting your hands on that, there's people who have made it to where it can play in a more modern OS. But these games, I mean, there's tons of them. There's tons of these games and pieces of software that are abandonware that are still solid. They still work really, really well, and oftentimes they're like the prototypes of what we have now, especially with certain types of software. That look for it because they'll be more basic and they're actually easier to use than the stuff today that just has all these like filler features that what are you going to do with those? But anyway, the games are kind of the big deal on Abandonia.com. That's kind of a weird word. And check it out. And you can download them right there. There's reviews built into it right there. They give you descriptions of what the games are. Like if you go to PCGamer.com and you read their section reinstall, where they cover old games again, a lot of times those old games, you're not going to find them on PCGamer.com, but a site like Abandonia.com, they'll have them, like Strife. I mean, there's a whole slew of these abandonware games that are just incredible. But the exciting thing also that's happening today is a lot of these games are getting remade, and literally remade, and just being upped with the graphics, but they're keeping the kind of the 90s ridiculousness, the 90s cheese, the 90s over the top that just has gone away in games, sadly. But it's coming back, and if you want to try out the originals, Abandonia.com, check it out. I'll be back with more. This is Brian Sovryn, and you're listening to Sovryn Tech.
For 90 Seconds on Sex with Dr. Paul.
When most of us are depressed or anxious, we're less likely to want sex. In fact, a lot of guys who are particularly stressed, anxious, or angry are less able to get erections when they're feeling so down or negative. So for most people, being in a negative emotional state is a good indicator that they won't want to have sex. However, researchers have found that there's a small group of individuals for whom the opposite is true. When they're anxious, depressed, stressed to the max, or angry, they actually want to have sex. Now, fortunately, most people who get horny when they are in negative moods prefer simply to masturbate. And that's a good idea, because the people who do become more aroused when they're in a negative mood tend to be less inhibited about sex in general, and they don't always use common sense about when it's okay to have sex or when it's too dangerous or risky. Now, unfortunately, for those who need more than masturbation when they're in a negative mood, their resulting sexual behavior can be out of control, especially if they don't have good sexual boundaries to begin with. At the most dangerous end of this spectrum are people who are angry, sexually aroused, and don't have good judgment. These are the individuals who are more likely to commit sexual assault.
For more, visit 90secondsonsex.com.
It's time for listener emails, where I cover questions sent to me via Sovryntech at hush.ai, the email address, sovryntech.com, which again, you can either be signed into Tumblr to use it, or it can be done anonymously as well. You do not have to have a Tumblr account to use sovryntech.com, even though it is technically a Tumblr webpage, but it is the main webpage for the show. You can also get in touch with me through Twitter, and you are welcome to direct message me through Twitter. I read, there's this great book out there called Social Media is Bullshit. And so, some of its conclusions I disagreed with, but a lot of them I kind of agreed with. And, I think, because before the show, we're on Facebook, we're on Google+, and I just not getting anything out of that. Twitter seems like getting quite a bit out of that, and just new followers every day. But sovereigntech.com, again, I mean, that's really like the main place to get in touch with the show. Everything's showcased there. Even the Twitter feed is on sovereigntech.com. So if you don't want to go to Twitter, you can just look at the bottom right of sovereigntech.com, and there is everything that I tweet. And I tweet all week long. It's not just on Saturdays or on Wednesdays when I put out a new show. Something else, check that out. There was a special release last week with Stas Sholinov from Open Garden, and we talked all about Open Garden. It was a great interview, great episode. So make sure you check that out if you haven't. So this week with the listener email, and again, if you have a question, please ask the questions. In fact, sometimes I get a lot of little questions. They're not ones that, because this segment's about 10 minutes long or so. And there's little questions that there's just no way that I could, I can't, actually I could talk about anything for 10 minutes. I really can. For those that don't know, I'm an advertising executive for Free Talk Live. And so my job as essentially a salesman is to be able, to sell shit. Not shit. I don't sell shit. Free Talk Live is an amazing venue and platform for anybody to offer their products on. But the idea is that I need to be able to talk. So I can't talk about anything for 10 minutes, but there's a lot of little questions that I get. And so, I'm going to rapid fire a couple of those, and then we'll get into the kind of the big question of the week. And the first question is that Golden Stallion, of course, that being I, Brian Sovryn, what do you think is the best Nintendo DS game, as the Nintendo DS is the biggest selling Nintendo system of all time? What is the best DS game, that Nintendo came out with? Now, this is interesting because actually recently there has been it's called Drastic, I believe. It's a DS emulator for Android, and it's apparently perfect. And it does better than PC jobs do. So, this is maybe why the person's asking about it. I'm going to guess they're correlating because this DS emulator's out there for Android now. So now you can play DS on your phone. You can play all these great games. The best game for DS is Radiant Historia. And you won't find that. I checked this out before this week's show. What are the top 10 lists or the top 25 lists that people have going on, like on IGN or some other site for, greatest DS games of all time? Nobody listed Radiant Historia. It's an RPG. It's a Japanese RPG. It was released in the United States. So you don't have to do any translating, but its style is what's called JRPG. And it is a great game. It has kind of an odd time travel element to it. Has somewhat of a steampunk flavor, in its style. Great story. I mean, just tremendous storyline. It is really, really great stuff. Matches up with the Zelda games easy in the way the storyline can progress. Just a awesome game that nobody talks about. So Radiant Historia, you can check that out. Now the second question was, Brian Sovryn, do you enjoy sex? Yes, absolutely. I enjoy it. Anyway, moving on. The question is, hi, Brian, please could you expand on your silver prediction on your next podcast? Were you serious saying it would go over $75, then under $5, or were you joking? I am fascinated to hear your reasoning behind this. More generally, I would love to hear your economic outlook, including that of metals, Bitcoin, and the dollar. And this is from a UK listener to your podcasts, which I think are great. Thank you, UK listener. I really appreciate you getting in touch with me. And you actually use sovereigntech.com. Thank you for that. And I will keep you anonymous unless you specifically say that you want me to say who you are. My general rule is to keep you completely anonymous, other than a he or she. And obviously I gave the country. But anyway, I don't know if I stated this on Sovereign Tech. Maybe I did, or if it was on an appearance I made with the lovely and hyper-intelligent Stephanie Murphy on her show Pork Therapy, or maybe I said it on Free Talk Live. I'm not sure. But anyway, I do hold to the quote-unquote theory that silver will not necessarily, 75 is just me giving a ballpark. It could do 100, and then do a drop. But yes, I am of the opinion that silver is going to do this skyrocket of a price thing. just go way up in value, and then it's going to crash. And it's going to crash low, and it's going to crash hard, and it's never, ever going to go up again as long as there are governments on the planet. Or as long as you're in an area where there are governments and they are in charge of the valuing of currencies. Where do I come up with this? Well, interestingly, I'm not sure how well I can exactly explain that, but I'll try. But interestingly, I've heard other people say the same thing, coming from completely different walks of life, and with completely different evidence. So that doesn't necessarily give something more credence, but I found that very interesting that there are people who think that, silver will do this, precipitous rise and then just drop like there's no tomorrow and never, go back up again. My thinking on that isn't so much economic. A lot of people talk about with metals this intrinsic value. And with intrinsic value, yes, silver can get used for a lot of things, medicinal, electronic, all that stuff, all that's great. But does that force upon it a value? No. And why do I say that? Because copper actually has more uses, more practical uses, more proven uses than silver does. And yet it doesn't value even close to what silver is valued at regularly. So you can't say, well, because something has an intrinsic value that it just generally is worth a lot of money. It's not true. There's plenty of cases for that. I mean, copper should be worth almost as much as gold, quite frankly, considering all that it can do. And then you say, well, it's based on rarity. Yeah, silver and rarity is a sketchy subject. And one I don't really have time for at the moment. But bottom line, I guess, my thoughts on silver as to why I think it'll do that is because it isn't so rare and it isn't so expensive right now on world markets that a lot of people will want to use it. And we've seen this, especially in the liberty movement and in anarchist circles, where people use it as a currency. And I think when these companies have tried to do that, I agree with them. I think that it has silver has the innate potential to be used as an alternative private currency, and a good one at that. Better than, in some ways, better than Bitcoin, because silver can be completely anonymous, because it's not digital for one, and again, anything that's digital, privacy goes out the window. Okay. Not anonymity goes out the window, but privacy goes out the window. Okay, anonymity to some degree can be achieved. But anyway, things that aren't digital, can be perfectly 100% anonymous and private. So silver has some advantages to it. And because of that, my opinion is that, we know that Keynesian, we know as anarchists with perhaps an Austrian economics background, we know that Keynesian economics is sooner or later has to fail to some degree. And in some point, the people that are pushing this Keynesian economic system that's all around the world, I think that they are going to make sure that silver in the eyes of the world essentially becomes useless, and they will make it rise. And you can do that. It's called a pump and dump. This is very, very commonplace economics, that's done even inside of Keynesian systems. And they're going to do a pump and dump on it. They're going to raise it all the way up so that everybody freaks out, starts buying into it. And then they're just going to crash it. Now, how can you do a pump and dump? I recommend hitting Wikipedia on how to do that, because, it's just something I don't necessarily have a lot of time for. So that's my opinion on the silver thing. That's the short and sweet of it. If you really want to know more, maybe I'll do a write-up or something, and I can post it on sovryntech.com. But as far as, the rest of the question is more generally, I would love to hear your economic outlook, including that of metals, Bitcoin, and the dollar. Okay, this is an area where I find myself, I find myself often unique in liberty circles and liberty thought. Do I think that with Keynesian economics, sooner or later, there kind of has to be a crash? Yes. But as long as something's backed by the gun, it never actually hits zero. So this is where I disagree with Austrian economics in that, like, well, the dollar is going to go to zero. No, it can't. As long as there's a government and they're pushing them, and government is the monopoly on force. Thus, as long as the dollar is backed by a gun, it's always going to have value. Now, it may be very, very minuscule value, especially in comparison to what it may have once been 100 years ago or whatever. But it will always hold. It will never, ever be zero as long as there's a bullet behind it. Okay? So, I get annoyed when people talk about that. And equally, I don't think there's going to be that, I don't think that big economic crash is ever really going to happen. And this is part of the economic outlook, because I do believe that very soon, as in a matter of years, perhaps only a couple decades, I am of the opinion, and I'm not the only one, but I am of the opinion that many governments will cease to exist. And when that happens, we will not go back to stone knives and bearskins. We will not go back to, living like the Amish. Okay, we will not go back. That's not going to happen. Bitcoin will be there to literally fill in the economy instantly. It's really that simple. And the internet's not going to go down because there's darknets, all that stuff. I mean, there's Tor, all these things. All these alternative communication systems already exist. They just kind of need to be used. And the Liberty Movement's starting to use a lot of them, which is great. Just like they're using alternative currencies like Bitcoin and Litecoin. The metal thing, as far as metals themselves, so point being, I don't see I see governments falling, but I never see an economic crash coming. In the overall sense that suddenly, money doesn't mean anything. As far as metals go, just real quick, I debate the value of any metal. I understand how they're useful in modern electronics and things like, and maybe some other more modern purposes. But outside of that, for something to just be pretty is not good enough reason for it to be used as a currency. So metals, I think they'll hold value for a long time. But in the far-flung future, maybe not. I'll be back with more. This is Sovryn Tech.
Spike. Launch.
In the third age of mankind, an age plagued by an evil empire that seeks to destroy humanity, it is our last, best hope for peace. It is Babylon 5.
All fighter squadrons launched. Return fire. Well, freeze them!
Watch Babylon 5.
You can watch Babylon 5 and experience the greatest show in television history. See the entire series completely free by going to thewb.com/shows/Babylon 5.
Software of the Week.
It is time for Software of the Week, where I cover pieces of software that I find interesting, or that I even, I've kind of shooken it up a little bit too, where I will update you on software as well, perhaps on pieces of software that are previous picks of the week, or on something that's been around for a long time, but recently just got a great update and makes it far more worth using, which is the case this week. Again, this is Sovryn Tech. I am Brian Sovryn, the golden stallion of the tech world, and I am on location, undisclosed, but I am on location. So if you hear some stuff, no big deal. Anyway, this week, I mentioned earlier in the show that I am using Twitter. I'm not using Facebook, not using Google Plus for the show anymore. But I am on I am on Twitter. And so I've been getting pretty intimately knowledgeable, with Twitter, and getting to understand it. And recently, this is great. The Twitter app for iOS and Android has two-factor authentication, which is great. A lot of things are doing this now. Microsoft recently started doing it. Google kind of set the standard with it, where you needed your phone to, say you had to reset a password or maybe even access it. You need your phone to give you a certain, like password or key code or something to be able to, to access it or to reset your password. And now Twitter does that. And I think that's so great because, in fact, if you watch shows like This Week in Tech, or, a lot of podcasts or a lot of even television shows, mainstream stuff, people aren't giving out their email address anymore. They're giving out their Twitter, handle, like the Twitter handle for Sovryn Tech is @SovrynTech, the @ symbol, and then Sovryn Tech. And so in a lot of ways, I consider, a Twitter account, again, I mean, I'm skeptical of all social media, make no mistake. But I consider someone's Twitter account that may be, depending on your business model or depending on your personal, use, that may be more important than your Google account. It may be more important than your email address. It may be the most important thing that you have on your computer as far as communications go. Twitter's that big of a deal. I mean, how many people go nuts trying to get that nice little, blue check mark, blue circled check mark on, next to their name. I mean, that's like, you have that, you're a made man, quote unquote. So Twitter's really important. So for them to secure it better, that's great. Also because, and I've talked about this on various shows. I know I talked about it on Pork Therapy, and I've talked about it on this show as well as Free Talk Live. Twitter, hasn't been so secure in the past. They have a 5-star rating with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is great. And they've sadly done some unfortunate dealings with governments around the world. But, Twitter does, like, there was some odd 250,000 accounts hacked, just in 2012, I think, or maybe, no, that was 2013. And also there was, the infamous story of a guy who someone got his was able to access his Twitter account. And by getting his Twitter account, he was able to contact Apple by using Twitter, essentially. I mean, I'm paraphrasing how it all happened, but bottom line, by using Twitter, he was able to wipe out this guy's computer and his phone, all by getting his Twitter, getting a hold of his Twitter account. So to get 2-factor authentication, on Twitter that's just a great improvement. I definitely recommend every company get to that point. And if security is important to you, maybe consider not using things, that don't have some form of 2-factor authentication. So check it out. It's the Twitter app. Find it on the App Store or on the Google Play Store. And of course, it would do it for Amazon too. So check it out. I'll be back.
What does freedom mean? Tune in to LRN.FM to find out. LRN.FM is the Liberty Radio Network, a collection of live talk radio and podcasts, all coming from a principled pro-liberty perspective. LRN.FM show hosts aren't left, right, or conspiracy kooks. You can tune in 24/7 to LRN.FM via your phone, computer, satellite, and more. Listen free anytime at LRN.FM. That's LRN.FM.
Brian! Stop playing those video games!
Just a minute, Mom.
Game Talk.
It is time for Game Talk, my favorite section of the show, because why? I love video games, and a lot of my listeners do too. In fact, I've gotten emails from people asking for more game content, and even at PorcFest this year, the Porcupine Freedom Festival, 2013, I had a couple people, say, it's like, look, I'm just so glad you talk about video games. And that's great. And thank you for the feedback because, I'm doing it. And I have been considering, I mentioned this in the last episode, I believe, I have been considering adding a little bit more video game content to the show, maybe like a kind of a game of the week sort of thing. So that's coming up. Anyway, the story this week is from Kotaku, where I get a lot of my video game stories from. And this is by Patricia Hernandez. And yes, this story is by a woman, and I don't want to make a big deal out of that because, I think, yeah, obviously, there's a woman writing about video games. Women like video games, but there's a lot of people who think it's like, what? Oh, that's not, video games aren't for girls, you know. But anyway, this is a great write-up by Patricia Hernandez. Video games are absolutely for women. You know, it's where does it say that only men play video games? Where does it say? Now, I mean, granted, when you play some of these games, you would think, okay, this is all geared for men, but you know, plenty of women that played video games. In fact, I think there's some numbers that saying that the percentage is getting 50-50 really fast. But here's a great write-up. We'll get right into it. The wonderful, terrible state of modern multiplayer video games. You are not alone. The words burst through the confetti, and then my Persona 4 characters received a health and SP boost. For a second, I felt a sense of community. I was reminded of a collective struggle that all Persona 4 players experience, a struggle that we don't have to bear alone. I smiled the first time I used the mechanic, where you send out an SOS signal that other people on the PlayStation Network can respond to. Having someone answer the call is heartwarming because it fits with the theme of the game, rely on others as a source of power, friendship forever. But mostly I felt awe as I considered the clever ways video games try to bring us together, the ways that a game can make me forget, however briefly, that I might be sitting alone in a dark room. It's an amazing thing for media to accomplish, no? I see things like this everywhere in games, things that keep us connecting with each other, bonding, and happy to see each other. The most obvious example is, of course, multiplayer, competing against each other, against other people, or cooperating with them to achieve something. Sometimes multiplayer has creative implementations. Games like Hybrid, Dust 514, and MAG have ongoing conflicts that players can influence with each individual battle. Brink, despite its shortcomings, was intriguing in how it tried to fuse single-player, co-op, and multiplayer with an overarching narrative. What these games have in common is that they encourage camaraderie around factions in games and where you're a part of something bigger. That's inspiring. While we'd be hard-pressed to find franchises that don't try to include competitive multiplayer nowadays, it's not the only way developers enable connectivity. Dark Souls, for instance, allows players to leave messages for one another that might help you out somehow, or perhaps they'll try to trick you. The implication here is the polar opposite of Persona 4's. The world is so harsh that even other players might be part of your strife. Although Dark Souls players assure me it's nothing malicious. Then there's more social networky ideas like the curious Miiverse, which allows you to form communities around games where you can talk with others and share art drawn on the Wii U's tablet. It's constructive and friendly. I imagine that Nintendo's Iron Fist will keep it that way. There are all examples of ways that games enrich games enrich our games by connecting us to one another, and that delights me. Where most people groan that multiplayer or social elements are being added to a franchise, I become excited at the idea that a developer might be trying something new. Who would have thought that Persona 4 would be better by bringing actual people into the mix? I think fans would have pushed back on the idea, even though it turned out to be a neat mechanic. But where I see fertile ground for fascinating concepts, others see a deterioration of the way things used to be, or more alarmingly, how video games enabled us to stay connected but stay alone. I'm talking about the modern supposed issue of isolation, the reality where we hang out with people but remain glued to our phones, where we talk to people all day long without uttering a single word, where we endlessly seek validation from strangers on the internet, a reality where at best we are social but not present, and at worst use our friends as a means of attaining a better farm in Farmville 2. The prime suspects: computers, cell phones, and video games. Technology, really. What we lost along the way, video game-wise, can be traced back to the days of arcades, a place where you stood shoulder to shoulder to an opponent and the hype of a crowd amassed behind you. While that community stays alive and passionate, particularly through the avid consumption of fighting games, anyone can see that most arcades are a shadow of their former selves. Though the decline of the arcade happened due to a variety of factors, one of the most readily apparent ones is the proliferation of home consoles. Playing games socially became more intimate, relegated to the couch, but still largely necessitating someone's physical presence. This, too, is slowly becoming less popular as some games refuse to include local multiplayer altogether. I recall listening to a panel at Indiecade this summer where Hakra creator Ramiro Cabarda identified Hakra as a much-needed hark back to times when games brought people together in a common space and everyone got drunk and hugged each other, ultimately bemoaning how this romantic ideal had been forgotten in the wake of modern multiplayer games that don't bring us together in the same ways. My impression is that many people feel similarly to Ramiro. Not to pick on him, though, because it's not like he's being inflammatory or anything. The concerns are reasonable to a degree. Looking at them on a more general level, they comply with the fears that we're forgetting what it's like to connect with one another like we used to. When I look at things like Johann Sebastian Joust or, heck, Sports Friends, it's clear to me that we're reaching back to something we had more in the past. Personally, I don't have attachment to these types of experiences, though I can recognize their appeal and what we phase out when we are more likely to buy Call of Duty over an indie game that focuses on local co-op multiplayer play. For me, arcades never existed as bustling spaces. And as much as I love, say, playing Smash Brothers with my college dorm mates, sharing a couch with a house full of people is as equally joyful as it is annoying. That's part of the charm, though. What most of current multiplayer strips away is that the technology and software which mitigates our lives strip away. No longer must we continually deal with the messy, tiresome aspects of having flesh and blood, in-your-face person that you have to actually pay attention to. More, you have to be mindful of. These messy elements can be useful, though. Board games, for example, take advantage of the nuanced interactions that come with having a person in front of you, and things that video games are only starting to play with at all. We'll skip ahead a little bit because this is like a really long read-up, and you can read it all at sovryntech.com. So I think it's just as important to ask, what are we gaining, as it is to look at what we're losing, though. I fear that it's easier to focus on the negatives. Even so, I'm still grateful that people still believe in the power of the couch, of the arcade, of the board game. These are all valuable things that we shouldn't lose. I just don't think they should be the ultimate ideal. I don't think that the way games connect us now is inherently worse simply because it's different. All I can do is appreciate the ways games try to bring us together. They sometimes miss the mark in how they do it, sure, and it's not all like how it used to be. No, now we have things like guilds and clans and Steam groups instead of, or in conjunction with, arcade acquaintances or friends on a couch. I'm grateful for that. I don't engage with the people I meet in the digital spaces like I would someone I know in real life. Maybe that's tragic, but then again, we can still make close friends, if not love interests, through these low bandwidth communication channels. And while most games don't come with the messy elements of dealing with someone in person, the way they use social elements can still be complicated and interesting in different ways. Maybe I'm cynical about what it is that we're leaving behind, but I'm absolutely captivated about where we're going and how the games seem to bring us together, even if it means that, yes, I'm still technically sitting in a dark room by myself, alone. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. If you want to send me an email, I'm going to talk about it more next week on what I think about multiplayer games, but this is kind of a hard story to find, where someone was actually, really intelligently writing out why they enjoy, modern multiplayer the way it is. So stay tuned. I'm leaving you with a hook. You're going to have to listen to next week's episode where I talk about this more. And don't worry, I won't do this hook thing or cliffhangers too often. I'll be right back.
Are you searching for a mouth-watering, all-natural, sweet and sticky treat? What if I told you it was also made by a chef who believes in freedom, just like you? You're not dreaming. This is real. Head over to mandrick.com. That's MANDRIK.com. There you'll find George's famous baklava in classic and dark chocolate flavors. To those with special health needs, George's famous baklava also has a treat for you. Golden delicious, low-carb, gluten-free almond cookies. Order with PayPal or Bitcoins. In just a few days, your sweet treats will await you right at your doorstep. One more time, that's MANDRIK.com for George's famous baklava. Hacker Stories.
It is time for Hacker Stories, where I cover the stories, I cover security issues, or I cover stories about some of the real heroes on planet Earth, and that's hackers. Black hat, white hat, gray hat, whatever. I think they're heroes. And this week, now, and I'm not the only one that has done this, but because recently I've heard other shows say the same, other tech shows, where they said, look, I'm not going to talk about Prism anymore. Now, I kind of feel like I was the first person to say that because there's just so much information coming out about Prism all the time. And people like Glenn Greenwald are pretty much making an entirely new career out of it, which is one of the big problems with the whole Prism thing, is that, okay, there's all this information that The Guardian essentially has, that Glenn Greenwald got from Snowden. And they're only releasing it piece by piece. And it's like, if you're a news organization and you're doing your quote unquote civic duty by informing people about, this terrible atrocity that a government is committing against pretty much the entire world, not just its own people, aren't you going to let it all out? And just like, hey, let people know? No, because to them it's more or less a money-making scheme. Now, as far as what part Snowden has in that, I don't know. But as it stands, I'm still going to say, he's not a traitor or an evil person. But then, at the same time, I don't know that he's necessarily, a great person, albeit that, releasing this information is pretty heroic. So this story is from Ars Technica. So we are going to talk a little bit more about Prism, but we're not actually talking about Prism. We're talking about the new thing, the other piece of software that Snowden released, and that's X-Keyscore. And the story is from Ars Technica, Building a Panopticon, the evolution of the NSA's Keyscore. How the NSA went from off the shelf to a homegrown Google for packets. The National Security Agency's apparatus for spying on what passes over the internet, phone lines, and airways has long been the stuff of legend, with the public catching only brief glimpses into its Leviathan nature. Thanks to documents leaked by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden, we now have a much bigger picture. When that picture is combined with federal contract data and other pieces of the public record, as well as information from other whistleblowers and investigators, it's possible to deduce a great deal about what the NSA has built and what it can do. We've already looked at the NSA's basic capabilities of collecting, managing, and processing big data, but the recently released X-Keyscore documents provide a much more complete picture of how the NSA feeds its big data monsters and how it gets situational awareness of what's happening on the internet. What follows is an analysis of how X-Keyscore works and how the NSA's network surveillance capabilities have evolved over the past decade. After the attacks of September 11, 2001 and the subsequent passage of the USA Patriot Act, the NSA and other organizations within the federal intelligence, defense, and law enforcement communities rushed to up their game in internet surveillance. The NSA had already developed a signals intelligence operation that spanned the globe, but it had not had a mandate for sweeping surveillance operations, let alone permission for it, since the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was passed in 1978. The Global War on Terror, or GWOT as it was known around DC's Beltway, opened up the purse strings for everything on the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance shopping list. The NSA's budget is hidden within the larger National Intelligence Program budget, but some estimates suggest that the NSA's piece of that pie is between 17 and 20%, putting its cumulative budget from fiscal year 2006 through 2012 conservatively at about $58 billion. Now, real quick on that, it's pretty much endless where, because the way the NSA can get funded, the way that intelligence organizations can get funded by law is that really they don't have to tell you. And so $58 billion is definitely being conservative. It could be, who knows? There's no limit. Early on, the NSA needed a quick fix. It got that by buying largely off-the-shelf systems for network monitoring, as evidenced by the installation of hardware from Boeing subsidiary Narus at network tap sites such as AT&T's Folsom Street facility in San Francisco. That's room 641A. We've talked about that on the show before. In 2003, the NSA worked with AT&T to install a collection of networking and computing gear, including Narus's Semantic Traffic Analyzer 6400, to monitor the peering link for AT&T's WorldNet Internet service. Narus's STA software, which evolved into the Intelligent Traffic Analyzer line, was also used by the FBI as a replacement for its Carnivore system during that time frame. So suffice it to say, the NSA has been doing this for a very long time. We'll go on with the article. All of these considerations were behind the design of X-Keyscore, based on public data such as clearance, job listings, and other sources. The NSA used a small, internal, startup-like organization made up of NSA personnel and contract help from companies such as defense contractor SAIC to build and maintain X-Keyscore. The X-Keyscore product team used many of the principles of agile development and the so-called DevOps approach to running a web operation, shipping code early and often having support staff and developers work alongside each other and reacting quickly to customer demands with new and sometimes experimental features. Built with the same fundamental front-end principles, albeit with some significant custom code thrown in, X-Keyscore solved the problem of collecting at wire speed by dumping a lot more to a local storage cache. And it balanced the conflict between minimizing how much data got sent home to the NSA's data centers and giving analysts flexibility and depth in how they search data by using the power of web interfaces like the representation state transfer. This is a great article, and I definitely recommend going to sovereigntech.com and clicking on the link and reading all about it. The picture I'm trying to paint for you is that they've been wanting this and been doing this for a long time. Okay, at least with, in the range of maybe 20 years. As far as like how they do it, they're copying the quote unquote free market. They're copying privatized businesses. So they're not inept at it because they're doing it the way that the market figured out was one of the more efficient ways of doing it. Because the government generally stays out of the hair of most electronics companies, so the market can actually work. That's why your computers are so much cheaper as compared to so much more expensive, like in the automobile world where the government is all over the place. Okay, so it's serious. It's very, very serious. Now, what can X-Keyscore do? Pretty much they get your name and email address, and they can find just almost every interaction you ever do. Now, the caveat to that, the digital interaction that you do, the caveat to that is that even on 1 or 2 people, 10 people, that is so much information they can't keep it. You can't store it anywhere. It's impossible to do that for almost everybody on the planet, including the people within the United States, which supposedly shouldn't be done to. They can keep it for like a couple days and then it just goes away. And actually, like the CIA and the NSA, I think by and large, of course, they're setting up the big data center in Utah, but they were using AWS. They were using Amazon Web Services to do long-term storage for this stuff. But even AWS can't handle this. They just you can't. Okay, so that's kind of the hope is that, well, it's just so much damned information that they can't keep it all, and so we're kind of okay. But then you look at stories now and they've talked about this for a while, but now it seems like it's really happening, where they're developing hard drives that are crystalline in nature and that can hold just tons of data, and so. Then there's a problem, because then the stuff's already in place to where you could record everything ever done by everybody on the planet, and keep it, or for at least as long as these hard drives can last. Now, that's something we've talked about too, is that data storage, even if you have the amount, the redundancy value, within 5 years, your average hard drive fails. But of course, that's changing to where hard drives now can last 20, 30 years, last a person's lifetime, which is really what you'd need all the information for anyway. So it's a little scary. X-Keyscore X is out there, but again, the caveat is that right now they can't keep it all. But it's something we're going to keep an eye on. We'll talk about it more as more information comes out. This is Sovryn Tech.
This is Stephanie Murphy, Sovryn Tech producer. You may know me from this show, but did you know that I have my own podcast? It's called Pork Therapy. Pork Therapy is a bit different from other shows. We cover current events, big ideas, and even relationship issues, all through the lens of how we can get more freedom in our lives. Oh, and you'll love Sex and Science Hour. Join me on my website, porktherapy.com. That's PORC therapy.com. Now back to Sovryn Tech.
What are you doing? I can't believe I caught you again. You know, Jesus doesn't approve of this little habit of yours.
I know, baby, I know it's wrong, but it feels so right.
Well, it ain't.
But I've been doing it since I was 12 years old.
It's nothing but a sinful perversion of nature, if you ask me.
But baby, I don't ever want to stop looking at tech websites, new gadgets, video games, software, or any of that stuff.
Well, then I'm leaving.
Okay. Bye.
Pick of the week.
It is time for Pick of the Week, where I get to talk about whatever I want to talk about. Usually because it is a pick, as then I pick something. Usually it'll be a movie, a TV show, maybe a game, maybe a comic book, a product of some kind, some device, or it could be a topic. I've done topics. I think I did one where I even read like my own poetry. I wrote a poem about, and I'm sure you can find it, in the archives. You can go to soundcloud.com/sovereigntech. All the shows are there. And I wrote a poem about Facebook and how there was this one night where Facebook went off around the world for about 2 hours, and then suddenly progress occurred. People were, found the cure for cancer and all that, but then, as soon as it went away, Facebook came back, and then everybody forgot, how to solve all these problems because everybody was looking for whatever. Anyway, you can look into that. I think it's even, I have it on sovereigntech.com. I posted it as it's like a little post on there. But that is not my pick of the week. My pick of the week is something that, when people say it, even now, they don't really believe you. They think you're joking when you say you're a fan of it, or of him, actually. They think, you're just saying that, or you're cracking some kind of pedophile joke or something. None of which is true in my case. I am an absolute fan of this person. I'm an avid listener, and there's plenty to listen to. This is a musician, and I have been a fan is pretty much almost as far back as I can remember. And that person's Michael Jackson. Again, people think that it was even today, after he's died, and at least for a little while, it seemed like it was all right to be a Michael Jackson fan again, without people making fun of you. Whatever the reasons were behind that. No, I am a genuine 100% know the lyrics, listen to not just 2 albums or 2 or 3 albums. I listen to 5, 6, 7, 8 albums of his, constantly, all the time. I watch his videos, very often. I even have on some websites, my avatar is him dancing, doing the dance to Smooth Criminal from the video game Moonwalker from Genesis. I am dead on a fan. So please, in the future, if you hear me talk about Michael Jackson, please, I'm not making a joke. I think the guy is amazing. And, why is it my pick of the week? Why do I want to talk about it? Because I think there's a lot of material that, because the bulk of society seems to have just completely written off anything Michael Jackson's done besides, say, Thriller, because of, allegations that he did some terrible things to children. And again, they are allegations. There's very, very little proof to a lot of it. No one pays attention to a lot of his later music. He has a good eight albums now. And people just don't pay attention to them. You have, there's Off the Wall, which, came out in the 70s. A lot of people, it's kind of a disco album, so, you can say it doesn't hold up so well, but I think the songs are just so, over the top that they're a lot of fun. But Thriller, of course, arguably considered by many to be the greatest album in history. It was, for a while, the biggest selling album in history. Some odd 21 million, 29 million copies, maybe. And they keep re-releasing it, so, just keeps selling more every time. And then there's Bad, You know, a lot of people know the album Bad. And then there's the album where I think a lot of people still know it because of the song Black or White. But there's the album Dangerous, which may be my favorite album by Michael Jackson. Has a lot of great songs on it. Do You Remember the Time? Who Is It? Give In to Me. Keep It in the Closet. The title song Dangerous. Which he actually performed constantly, like in a remixed form, and everybody loved it and wondered, where did that song come from? Well, if they just listened to the last song on his third album, they'd know, or fourth album, depending on how you're counting them. You know, just track for track. I mean, pretty much all his albums are track for track anyway, as in track for track, meaning you can listen to every single song, and every single song is good. There's no filler, and Michael Jackson never, ever did filler. Everything was just him pouring his heart out. He really, I mean, to me, he is the greatest musician in history. You know, I mean, would I call him the greatest band? No, he's not a band, fine. But he is the greatest musician, you know, just in history. And he wrote most of his own songs. Interesting thing that a lot of people don't know, you know, me being a huge fan of him, I actually don't like the song Thriller. I don't mind it. But it's easily his worst song. And interestingly, he didn't write it. Rod Templeton wrote that. Michael Jackson did not write Thriller. Now you can say it's like Elvis, where, yeah, Elvis didn't write any of his music, yeah, but, you know, his performance made it his. Sure, yes, Michael Jackson's performance made Thriller his. But Thriller, you can definitely tell, especially when you compare it to everything else that MJ did throughout his musical career. It's an oddball. It doesn't make any sense. And you know, it's just kind of like this weird song again, when you contrast it with everything else. So it's not a song I really like, you know, I mean, I can have fun with it, you know, and I can listen to it, but I actually don't like the song. And again, he didn't even write it. As to where every other song, by and large, every other song he's done, he wrote. In fact, I'm having a hard time. I can't even think of songs that he didn't write. I don't, you know, other than Thriller, which there's something to that. There's a story to that, but you're going to have to ask me if you want me to tell you the story about Thriller, because there's a lot more to it. There's a reason that got pushed so hard. The song itself, not the album. The album sold because of its own merits. You know, great songs like Pretty Young Thing, Human Nature, you know, Want to Be Starting Something, just Beat It. I mean, just great songs. But if you want to know the story behind Thriller, you're going to have to email me and ask. Anyway, so we talked about Thriller, we talked about Bad, talked about Dangerous, but then there's more. You know, most people don't even go past that. They don't realize that there's still, he still put out albums. There was, of course, a Greatest Hits album called History. The second disc of that Greatest Hits album is all new material. It's another album. Scream is on there. A lot of people might know that song. He did it with his sister Janet Jackson. And yes, they are two different people. There was a time, believe it or not, where people thought Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson were the same person. And I remember when they were on like the Grammys, and they actually like stood next to each other and hugged each other and like, look, yeah, see, we're different people. I mean, that's just how outlandish the theories got about Michael Jackson. You know, but so you have that album, which has great songs, Strangers in Moscow, DS, Money, Earth Song, you know, just great songs. Then he came out with another album called Blood on the Dance Floor, which I guess you could kind of call an EP that had 4 new tracks on it, and then the rest of it was like remixes of the songs from the Greatest Hits album from History. It wasn't remixes of his greatest hits. It was remixes of the songs around the second disc. That was like a whole other album. Great. The 4 new songs, Blood on the Dance Floor is awesome. There's a song, Scary, on there, which is just I mean, haunting and awesome. And there's a song called Morphine, which is actually like really rocking. You know, it's heavy. It's you can't really call it pop music, and make no mistake, you know, Michael Jackson was the king of pop, is the king of pop. And then there was another album that came out in like 2001, which is a masterpiece called Invincible. You know, a lot of people know one song off of that called You Rock My World, which was a big hit. You know, but every song on there is great. There's songs where Biggie Smalls, the Notorious B.I.G., he does some stuff in it. Obviously, it's a sampling because Biggie was dead. But there's like stuff. Rod Serling is, obviously long dead. Does some music in it. I mean, there's just these great songs. There's a song called 2000 Watts, which if you have a serious stereo system, I mean a really serious stereo system, play 2000 Watts, and I mean you're going to give that stereo system a workout. And all, jamming, you can dance to everything on there, on the album Invincible. Then, of course, there was the album that came out after he died, which was called Michael. And that has a couple great songs on it. A lot of people were, they said that the album lacked polish, and that he didn't, he wouldn't have allowed some of these songs to get out there. But there's a song, Hold My Hand, that's a duet with Akon that I thought was really good. And then there's another one that he did with 50 Cent, and it's called Monster. Great song. I mean, really cool song. And then he came out with there was a whole remix album after that came out called Immortal. And some of the remixes on that, where they're like doing almost a mashup of all of his songs, those are intense. I mean, if you want to like listen to Michael Jackson's entire like catalog inside of 2 CDs or inside of 2 albums, because it's disc 1, disc 2, check out Immortal. It's a great way, and if you haven't listened to Michael Jackson, it's a great way to get introduced to his stuff, especially to stuff that you may have never even knew existed. So you have all of that. There's stuff that's unreleased. There's stuff that you can get on the Pirate Bay. Like there's an album called 7, because it was going to become his 7th album. And there's a song on there called Let Me Let Go. There's also an Ultimate box set that Sony came out with just before the contract of Michael Jackson's work was going to be over with Sony, and so they released like everything they had their hands on, and there's not a whole lot to that's kind of a weak release. But anyway, there's this album 7 out there, which, torrenting, thank you for torrenting existing, because otherwise there's a song called Let Me Let Go, and you could probably catch it on YouTube. It is so good. I mean, it is classic Michael Jackson work, and the only way you can hear it is by downloading it. You're not going to get it on iTunes. You're not going to get it on Google All Access, as great services as those are. This is the only way you're going to get your hands on it. So thank you, technology, for giving us the ability to hear it, like some of the masterpieces that we would have may never have known that MJ did. Anyway, yeah, so, and I could get into, but I don't know the answers. I could get into, why, I could ask the question, why do people not like Michael Jackson? I have no idea. I mean, is it because the whole pedophilia thing that everybody just like kind of stayed away, is because of his skin condition, his genuine skin condition that he had, that made him turn white? I don't know what it is. I had a t-shirt. This is when he was still alive. I had a t-shirt that said, it wouldn't fit me now because it was like 3X. But I had a t-shirt that said, I still listen to Michael Jackson. I had it custom made. And people always thought I was kidding, like that I was cracking some kind of joke. And like, no, I'm serious. I'm telling you that I still listen to this guy. Anyway, if you have thoughts on that, send me an email, sovereigntech@hush.ai. And if you hadn't thought about Michael Jackson recently, give him another listen. Trust me, you're going to love it. I'll catch you next week. Again, we'll have a double load. This is Brian Sovryn. You've been listening to Sovryn Tech.
This has been Sovryn Tech. Visit us at sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. There you can connect with us, see more of what you've heard on today's show, and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is open source. We encourage you to share. Later, nerds.